Welcome back to Night Flight. Today, Eve Lorgen is back. Her website is evelorgen.com. She is a hypnotherapist, a counselor, a researcher, an author. She has worked with milabs and other people. So she is a woman that has a lot of knowledge in the field of psychology. And I have invited her to talk about men, children, and princess programming. So, Eve, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. Yes.
So, Manchild, the Latin word for that is Puer aeternus, and usually in mythology that was used to describe a child god that never aged.
Sounds like Pan.
Yeah. Yeah, of course you come now.
And then your cat comes. Puts his butt right there. That's kind of funny. Hey, you never know. Things happen.
Yeah. And then Carl Jung picked it up and described somebody that is emotionally immature and kind of stuck in his mental and emotional development in his adolescence. Would you say that is a description that fits?
Yes, there's a lot of people who have kind of like a stunted emotional development that manifests in adulthood and in their lives. And I would say that's right on. Yeah, in males and females, but it seems to be a big trend with people who come to me with relationship issues and, you know, the different troubles that they have. And a lot of my things are the paranormal, sometimes the weird, but also interpersonal troubles, which go beyond the norm, that may fall into what we call narcissistic abuse patterns, or things where they think there's a demonic or a paranormal interdimensional interference. And then, of course, the love bite stuff. But even within that, we will find the personality styles that there is developmental stunting or something happens so that they don't function well like a mature adult would, you know.
Yeah.
So, and I think a lot of that is trauma, but there is programming, I think, that we kind of discussed even before the show, even where we are as a culture in the world post World War I, World War II, and as we approach what's next, I think there is programming to actually affect what would be, let's say, a natural development if we didn't have engineered wars and mind control programming and the narcissistic abuse. You know, you would probably have healthy males and females who would ideally be able to go through the process of, you know, transitioning from childhood, adolescence into adulthood, parenting, and maybe grandparenting, and going from, you know, the child to the warrior, to the father, to the grandfather, to the sage. And that's not happening in our culture. And, you know, maybe it's a rites of passage that just doesn't happen. It gets stunted. But I start to, when I look back, I'm thinking that families who have been through intergenerational war, for example, even people that I know whose parents were in World War II, whose nations were in occupied countries, where they struggled to make a living and they were under extreme trauma, and they had to you know, work 2 jobs or go into near slavery just to survive or even raise a family. And I'm just using this as an example because it's something that I know what it created in let's say 2 generations, this kind of psychology, where let's say the father was unavailable to be present, not only as a husband, but as a father to his children, because having to have 2 jobs and dealing with the trauma of the effects of the war and not being psychologically prepared to handle that responsibility, and then falling into addiction through alcoholism or sporadic alcoholism and violence and acting out. So being an unavailable husband and an unavailable father of children. I'm just going to give you a case study. Okay. So in this case study, the father was emotionally unavailable and absent and a bit manipulative and controlling as a way to try to offset the unmet needs of the wife, who had her own issues of unresolved trauma and her own personality style of maybe using the children and what I call the male, the son, who's the golden child of the woman who can't get her emotional needs met through the marriage, through the absent husband and the alcoholic maybe, or the workaholic, and then uses the son as the golden child to enmesh emotionally with that golden child, to use him to get her emotional needs, but also ogle over him in such a way that basically that one turned into the golden child narcissist as an adult. So that male grows up to be either a covert or overt narcissist, who was the golden child of the over enmeshed mother who did not get her emotional needs met and tried to use her son to get her emotional needs met because her husband was unavailable. So that creates an emotionally stunted growth of a male who may actually manifest like of a covert narcissistic personality disorder, which in turn, that male would act out he's still trying to get the unmet needs of the father who was unavailable, trying to get the approval of the father figure by being a workaholic and being emotionally unavailable in his own marriage because of the hidden rage against the enmeshed mother issues and the loss of the father figure, and then replaying this in his own relationships and family to have basically a devastating marriage, and then his own child who is neglected emotionally, and then is modeling the behavior to treat, let's say, that male who grew up and got married, treated his wife badly, like the overt narcissist who emotionally neglects and makes that wife invisible and worthless, and then shows and models that abuse to the son. Okay. So this is like a style of patterning that will go for generations unless the therapeutic healing process takes place. And so the male will grow up to be the man child emotionally, and who's always looking for the unmet father figure and mentor who could help him through the rite of passage into the appropriate male, a mature male who becomes a protector and a father and a warrior or a sage. They never go to that level of development because of their stunted childhoods that I see. If I look at it culturally and collectively in the world, it's due to the effects of war and the unhealed wounds in those cultures or in those people, and personality styles that basically avoid doing the psychological work or counseling. They think it's below them. Well, like, we don't do that. A man doesn't do that. They never talk about their emotions. That's for sick people. And so they shame, counseling or therapy or, healing the trauma wounds that causes problems down the road in interpersonal relationships. And the women who enable those men are actually just as much of a problem, that create the narcissist males and the immature man boys. So we've got like generations of man boys, and also the female princess who, it depends on the parenting, so maybe I should pause because I don't want to overcomplicate, one and the other. But this is something that I saw even in people that I know, where I looked on the generations and the style of relating based on war and the unhealed wounds of post-traumatic stress and war, and then the cultural traditions, which threw them out of effective parenting and economic duress in war or after war, that made the father completely unavailable to the children as well as the wife. And so it just creates generations of messed up people.
Yeah.
Unless they do their healing work and they become aware and they are driven through their own passions to heal and to go through those mature rites of passions, like the hero journey
Mhm.
for a man or a woman. But it takes, in my view now, when I look at this in retrospect in terms of personality styles, that there's only certain types of personality styles that could make the jump from emotionally stunted to the hero journey, or to the true healing journey. And so that's something that I see now, like who are the threats to us in terms of interpersonal relationships and families, and who would be a safe partner or a safe person based on how they have developed. Because there are dangers interpersonally. And, if I was, a grandmother and I wanted to warn or teach my children and grandchildren, I would let them know, I would try to teach them as much as I could about how to prepare themselves for parenting and for relationships, so that they won't have to go through the suffering I went through, or that their, grandparents had to go through. So that they could be appropriately prepared.
Yeah. What would you say are the early warning signs if somebody, let's say, would like to avoid emotionally immature people? What would you recommend to look out for?
Well, definitely, the obvious one would be narcissistic personality disorder,
Mm.
and what they would call maybe the borderline personality disorder, where there is a distinct emotional distorted dysregulation that causes them to be very reactive and punitive or malicious, or see things from what we call the ideas of reference, where they always keep referring back to themselves. Every interpersonal thing, it always goes back to how they react to something they're perceiving that's actually a distorted reflection of an unresolved wound. Like, for example, a borderline would be, they interpersonally will interact with you in such a way to avoid abandonment issues, so that they become overly clingy, or they might enmesh themselves too much with someone in such a way to be annoying, or they would be obsessively in love and more of like obsessively and clingy, and act kind of creepy. And then if you pull away and try to have your own space, they react violently sometimes, and may carry out violent acts to themselves or to others, or just big blowouts, because they're perceiving the abandonment that they had as a child. So they could be dangerous in relationships, whereas the narcissist might just be punitive and malicious. And then the real dangerous thing that narcissists do, and this is something that I think should be like a crime, except it's like a relationship crime.
Mm-hmm.
And what narcissists will do, and it's a red flag, is they basically, after a while, they will treat you as if you don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
You are invisible. You are worthless to me. The devaluation, discard. Well, they don't even notice you. They won't respond to emails, phone calls, text communications. They don't notice you. You don't, it's like you don't exist in their life, even if you're like married to them. So you can't have a normal relationship with someone who has that kind of personality, because they're so focused on themselves and their own, maybe their own jobs, or their own self image, or their own problems. They actually cannot actually be present for anyone else but themselves.
Mm.
And they would be dangerous. So that's actually a red flag, just basically a type of selfishness, a self-absorbed narcissism, or sometimes it's just because they're having such a hard time functioning that they really can't be present, and they exhibit as kind of being narcissistic and selfish. And so you won't be able to have a good relationship with them, and they will be bad parents, and they will be toxic to you and others.
Mm.
So I see that a lot, like the narcissistic thing. And then you see it in the man boys or the princess programming, both. It's the narcissism, and it's really sad, because there's a type of narcissism that might be an Asperger's thing, which is not like a narcissistic personality disorder. It's more of, they're not able to be fully present because there's a a brain cognitive nervous system dysregulation. Whereas in the narcissistic personality disorder, they've created false egos to basically mask their own shame and their own trauma in a way that makes them the bully. So they're the ones that will promote the fight, flight type of reactivity compulsively, like as a style of behaving. And so they will be the bullies and the ones who get the attention, and they will be blaming and projecting their stuff on other people. So that a lot of times, like, the narcissist will be attracted to, let's say, the one who's more of the codependent, who might be the empathic one, who might be more acquiescing, and the healer, the fixer, or even the ones who were more shy, or like the lost child in psychology, family style. And I know that might be a little bit hard to understand. It's just how I see this when people pair up and then they have relationship problems. You have like, my spouse is the narcissist and I'm the codependent, or it could be one's, reversed. But they tend to complement one another when they have unresolved and unhealed, quote, attachment wounds or trauma wounds. So when we heal, our style of relating will change. And so that's what we want, but we sometimes lose friends when that happens, when we really go through our healing process. But the ones who are more likely to heal and do the healing tend to be the people who were, I would say, the codependent, or the ones who were not the narcissists. So the narcissists are the ones who are least likely to do the healing and the more dangerous to you and to society. And that's where trauma is really bad, because we have different reactivities to trauma in the human psyche. Like, to make it simple, and this is something that you mentioned, Richard Grannon, who is actually excellent with his understanding of trauma. And he also refers to the Pete Walker book called Complex PTSD, From Surviving to Thriving. And in Pete Walker's breakdown of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is something that really many of us are seeing in our practices and even in our lives, where, let's say, the trauma itself wasn't something like a car accident or a hurricane, or maybe just a stint in combat as a young adult, for example, but it would be developmental trauma, more like you were raised in a family from, age 0 to 5, 6, 7 teenage years by a narcissistic parent, or an addict, an alcoholic, a personality disordered parent, or one who just wasn't available. Then those people will have complex post-traumatic stress disorder personality styles. Okay. And so he breaks it down into a real simple way of understanding. And I like Pete Walker's way of seeing this, so that we can apply the antidote and what we should do for each style. So if somebody is more fight or fight flight, that might be more of a bully narcissist style, who's more of the overt projector bully, maybe assertive to the point of being aggressive. Whereas, and flight is basically just dissociation, right? So flight in and of itself is not necessarily a bully, but if you have someone who goes more into the freeze response, they won't have the fight, bullying, aggressive, narcissistic nature. They might be more of the, the lost child, or a codependent, or even a paranoid kind of personality that's more quiet and introverted and fearful of social interactions. And then you will have, let's say, because of the fight, freeze, and then fawn is something that is more recognizable as the codependent, who's the fixer and the healer and the empath, and they're always looking for ways to acquiesce and create peace in a situation or in a family. So they're the kind of people who develop very intuitive skills, because they're always assessing in their environment, where maybe where a threat is, or where, if somebody could get angry, like we try not to get the alcoholic father enraged. So they're like the peacekeeper who knows how to be invisible or funny or do something in the situation to offset some kind of threat. And so they develop a style of always being the one who's like where people come to for problems, and they're the over helpers and sometimes the overachievers. So, but that's also a maladaptive style if you don't deal with the original trauma. So when we can understand what those 4 basic styles are of trauma, we can see how relationships will pair up complementary, like, oh, the narcissist with the codependent, or the narcissist with the freeze kind of shy person, or the borderline with the narcissist, or whatever. And then you can see how this will play out in relationships, and then family styles, and then parenting, and how their kids turn out. So we could apply the antidote. So if someone is normally, they're a high fight, flight, more aggressive, they would have to pull back and actually be a better listener, and to employ more empathy by addressing their own. And they're the ones who are least likely to get well. Let's just face it. They're the ones who are going to avoid and reject and project and blame and actually not get well. Whereas actually even the borderlines and the codependents and even the freeze types, they have a better probability of being able to go to therapy and get well if they understand what their trauma is and how to work through it and learn how to deal with it. Because there's something about the narcissist that is, I don't want to say it's unrecoverable, but it's more difficult. And that's what presents a danger to everyone. So, we can have compassion and be a good Buddhist and a good Christian and want to have compassion on those who we realize, they're acting out their traumas and even in their addictions. But at the same time, even in a love bite or a love obsession, for example, and this happens in my work where someone thinks this person is their twin flame, they've got this phenomenal connection, which is kind of a complementary thing. Like maybe it's a narcissist and a codependent, or maybe it really is an engineered relationship through other forces, but it will be unhealthy if left to the unhealed traumas where this relationship plays out. Even if it is a twin flame, even if you have real love, it will still be toxic, probably to both of them, but more to the one who is not the narcissist. So that when we go through our healing process, we must pull back from those sources of toxicity, even if we love and forgive them. Okay. So there's an element of common sense that must override what I see a lot of programming in religiosity. And it could be Buddhist or Christian or Muslim or whatever. It doesn't matter. There has to be a common sense in psychology and the probability of what happens if we stay in certain relationships. Whether or not we love and forgive them doesn't make a difference. A toxin is a toxin. A snake is a snake. And a scorpion sting is a scorpion sting. And it will kill you over time unless you keep your distance and you be wise. So this is why I think even the field of psychology has been misdirected in some ways, as well as religion. And we need to find a synthesis between the two to deal with the realities of what we're really facing.
Yeah, with the narcissist, I like to make things simple and boil it down. So what I do is I always check for the 3 E's, and that is lack of empathy, entitlement, and exploitation.
That's good.
If I see these 3 traits, then I know what I'm dealing with, because that is always there with a narcissist. Some other behavior, let's say the love bombing, or not every narcissist does.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
But these 3 traits, you can bet your head on it. The
entitlement. That's a big one with the with the male narcissists, even the covert narcissists. They do have a strong entitlement, which makes them unavailable to anyone else really but themselves and what they think they are. That's sad, you know. And the whole exploitation thing, it's a style of it's almost, you know, when I look at it, it reminds me of feral psychology, where they somehow grew up in a way where they had to learn how to manipulate, exploit, and do as many things with kind of like a feral psychology to get what they needed to grow up. And it has a feral nature to it. Have you noticed that?
What do you mean?
Like a compulsive, they're so compulsive in their own survival of their false ego mask and their survival needs that it becomes a feral compulsion to compulsively manipulate, compulsively, like they look at someone and they immediately are figuring out inside their head how they can manipulate in order to get what they need. And it's just how they behave. They have no idea that their entire structure of personality is based on exploitation, manipulation, and control in order to avoid death, avoid abandonment, avoid exposure, avoid feeling their shame. And it's, I mean, sometimes I think it's the definition of evil. I mean, I hate to say it, but I feel like saying it's demonic personality disorder when it's taken to the psychopathic ends of malignancy. I mean, because when we talk to clairvoyants and people who perceive these things, almost always for a clairvoyant, they see an attached entity or a dark spirit or a demonic thing. And I think this goes above and beyond their internal conflict,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, as I said before, we started recording in the 1920s. That was shortly after the First World War. There was this woman, Marie-Louise von Franz, and she noticed this tendency of immature adults, even during those years. But I would say, as a society, as the collective, we have perfected that. And sometimes I wonder if, you know, the thing that, yeah, okay, it's no longer enough that one parent works. Usually they have to work both to to pay all the bills and what have you. And sometimes I have a strong feeling this is purposely engineered that way, because the controllers, and I'm not talking about governments. Government, to me, that these are just pawns. Yeah. They get their orders from somebody else.
Yeah.
And I would say they know exactly how our psychology works. Yeah, the real controllers. And when I look at the mess that we have created in terms of family relationships, friendships, and I would say that was really deliberately. So that, you know, the family union that is healthy and can give you support, to break it up in increments until there's nothing left.
Yeah. So you're speaking of post 1920 and World War I, II,
even World War II, because that that entire thing that started, I guess, predominantly after World War II, that people had, you know, both parents have to work, or some people have two jobs, three jobs, and whatever. So yeah, and of course that takes a toll on the children.
Yeah, so it would be the unavailability of parenting and relationship that would be maybe normal if we lived in a, you know, even like the Native Americans and people who were agrarian before the industrial. But even so, this happened way back in the peasants and lords and the feudal systems where people were in dire poverty, but it's as if, they don't make, people can't be available to their children because of the poverty and the abuse. But I think I would agree with when there are two working people, or if there's one working person and then they have to work so much that they're overburdened and unavailable, that creates the problem as well. But I would still say that when someone actually gets it, let's say they can't be available because of the job, but they can still make themselves quality relating when they do relate. And a healthy person can do this to override the absence in time. So, because there are people who may have been present, but because of their emotional unavailability and their inability to be present, not only to themselves, but to the children, are unavailable, even if they're there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I've seen that where, if there could be a quality of true presence when they are with you, that could override some of the, time absent because of long working hours. But I know that the workaholism in the American culture and in the overachievers, or just that's just what you need to do to survive, that actually has a heavy toll on the children. And what I'm seeing with males, because we mentioned, the man boy thing, there's confusion on, what does it mean to be a man and to be able to grow into being, the father and the protector. And, like the good male mentor is absent from young males. There's so many who are raised in single parent families, usually single moms raising sons, where the sons don't have the appropriate father role model or male mentor model to help them actually grow up into being good, strong men. And I see that as a real problem,
Yeah. And what you already touched upon, the subject of absent fathers. And yeah, not that daddy is not there, but sometimes, let's say it's the weekend. Daddy is in the garage. Daddy is in his hobby room. Daddy is, has always something to do, to fix, to, you know what I mean?
Yes,
And
yes.
those are, during our times, this is not because of trauma that they came, all came from war. There is, I don't know, a disconnection that goes much deeper.
Yeah. I agree with that. I've seen that with, like, oh, well, when he's home and he spends the whole time golfing and completely ignoring the son who is just ogling after to be with his dad. And then the dad basically ignores him as if he doesn't exist. And then that's a tremendous wound. And there's a type of, a type of narcissism. There's something that came to my attention actually recently, and it was within, I don't know if this is off base, but it was within a Christian video from some women who were inspired by the Holy Spirit. I'll just say it for what it is, in terms of understanding the human psyche and the human spiritual nature, and what happens when our connection to what we will call the eternal spirit, which is the highest eternal, that is only all good and wonderful. Let's say God, like the good God of all that is only good. So there would be an only good spiritual aspect. And then there would be the heart, soul, personality, emotional aspect that corresponds to will, and also the physical body aspect, which corresponds to physical passions. And so it would be like the triad aspect, the triune aspect of being. So that if we wanted to be truly healthy and ideal, connected to the Holy Spirit, for example, or to, let's say, somebody who was individuated according to Jung or actualized, that they would be having the highest spirit being the GPS system of guidance over the other aspects, so that it would have a command on the heart, soul, personality, so that it would be guided toward a higher ethics and love. And then the body let's say the passions, lower passions, or the tendencies towards selfishness, whether it's eating or sex addiction or selfishness for pleasure, it would be, I don't want to say in subjection, but it would be appropriately guided so that the selfishness and the narcissism doesn't take over the personal, how the person acts. So it's like there has to be an alignment with the highly spiritual and the heart, personality, soul, with the body, passions, so that the spirit and the heart has a greater dominance over the lower physical passions. So the person isn't just selfish, basically. But it has to happen, because if that spiritual integration is not present, the likelihood of narcissism and lack of maturity will be present. So it kind of reminds me even of what Dr. Corrado Malanga, who I studied under, who is actually he's an organic chemist, but he did alien abduction research, where he found that if we integrated what he called the mind, soul, spirit aspect of someone, then they could integrate and be free of the alien manipulation, which caused all kinds of problems if these aliens were the malevolent ones. But there has to be a recognition of the triune nature, so that our highest guidance GPS system, which must be linked in our being, has to be the highest spiritual eternal now that is ethically moral, right? Or it is the good, and it is the aware part. So that has to be in the driver's seat of our being in order to appropriately mature and be what is the divine, what we should be, really. But it is not, because somehow these things are not in alignment, or they are disregarded as not being important, so that they can't help but be compulsively selfish, or compulsively, sex addicted, or alcoholics, or eating, or just want to spend all the time golfing, or, doing shit that they're just ignoring the relationships, because love is not the commander in chief. I don't know. I wish I had the answers, to tell you the truth, but that one stuck
But you
with
know
me.
what? I think these conversations are important, especially now, because we have a situation now where we are at the crossroads. And I think it is high time that we ourselves think about, how do we want to live together? Do we really want to go back to this rat race? They are working 2 and 3 jobs. Everybody in the family is totally messed up. Nobody has time. Nobody is listening. Nobody is noticing that emotionally one child is going under. They just get complicated, and they are no longer the sweet little kid. They are acting out. And I think that is because we have also a window now where we can say, you know what, we are going to level the playing field now, because that construct that you impose on us, we no longer want that, and we are going to do something else. Yeah.
I mean, we need to be present for one another in ways where we can return to a more humane way of being, and I call it the balanced way of being, even within a Taoist understanding, where it is not balanced to have to work so many hours a day to barely be able to even pay the bills, and then to, it's to the point where you're sick, and then you can't afford to get well because you have to pay out of pocket to get alternative care, because you can't trust the pharmaceutical industry, because they're going to make you sicker and want you to die. And so it's struggling to have enough energy to work, to barely be able to function, to be able to pay the bills. And being a single parent, or it's not enough. Like, you need to do this with someone else. It gets to the point where it's almost impossible to live alone as a single parent, or even as a divorced person. Even if you're well, or even if you're smart, it's still economically almost becoming more and more difficult for even like the middle class to barely be able to hang on and function. So we have to do something about this, where we can change the way that we're relating to life and to one another, and to understand, like, if this is run by like the archons that they knew about in the Gnostic understanding, or the Illuminati or whatever, we have to recognize, you know, where the culprit is and where the distortion and the corruption is, so that we could correct that and no longer allow them to have power over us. And it seems to be that they're trying to, basically, this is what Barbara Bartholic had shared with me and James Bartley over the years. Like, they were basically trying to breed out love. And so you end up with just a bunch of, you know, technological Asperger's syndrome, you know, geeky people who basically just love and emotionality and relating is just not part of their gig, because they just don't act it and get it, and they become actually more and more psychopathic. You know, if love is absent and missing, and they're really being manipulated and basically genetically modified to become these, you know, artificial intelligent run robots who lack love and lack emotional intelligence, which I think is happening. And then that leaves them susceptible to hosting by demonic entities, or control and manipulation by whatever comes their way. And I think that's happening with the AI and some of the more malevolent, quote, alien agendas.
Yeah. And then you end up with children that have beards.
Oh yeah, like the man boys and the woman child, and you know, the narcissistic moms who make the kids be their parents, and or their therapists, you know, or yeah, because the princess programming is interesting, because I even think there's something within, you know, the MK Ultra monarch programming, even though that's very trauma based, but culturally we probably see this in how Disney tried to make, you know, the princess thing, and it's unrealistic, and it doesn't really work in the real world, you know. It's
and of course what's also going on there is savior program with the princess programming. You have to have the knight on the white horse who's going to rescue you from life's difficult times. And then I'm very allergic to the idea of royalty, because I think there is no such thing as royalty, but of course the princess has to get the prince.
Well, that's where it came from, right? The original kings and queens, and you know, that's a whole history in and of itself. But I think everything gets like co-opted and hijacked and corrupted from something that might have been originally a good archetype of some sort, where like the real kings and queens of honor and integrity, who have, you know, been through the hero journey and are blessings to their children and their progeny and their culture, versus the corrupted, hijacked, hosted ones who are just selfish and entitled, narcissistic, psychopathic, you know, who have hijacked the whole good thing. It's almost like every good thing has been, you know, co-opted, hijacked, and then reverse inverted, right? So that they change the, actually, I mean, and this is part of the linguistic mind control as well, where they actually change all the themes and meanings of things on an archetypal level, so that we incorporate the inversion instead of the real, which is the pure and the good. And you see that in the Hollywood, obviously, you know, and it's kind of an obvious thing once you understand the symbology and what they're really doing on these deep psychological and spiritual levels, which goes back to, I have to say, like the ancient Gnostic understanding of the, you know, some of the more Christian Gnostic started to pick this up about the whole thing with the archons and how they were created and how they behave in psychology as a virus that corrupts the the human psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's evident today, and now how it's playing out, we see it more and more. It's just that, can we stop this corruption before, ultimate destruction takes place? Like, how can we reverse this process and understand it for what it is?
Mm. I stumbled on a quote from Carl Jung concerning the man-child, and the end of that quote, I find that very interesting. He said, "Behold the secret conspiracy between mother and son, how they help each other to betray life."
What? Wait a minute. Say that again. I want to get this, what he was talking about, because I
Behold
don't
the
remember that.
secret conspiracy between mother and son, how they help each other to betray life.
Betray life?
Yeah, and I thought about it, and that is why I said I found that very interesting. But I think it's correct, simply because in that situation, the mother is misdirecting her love and attention. A part of because everything goes into the boy when
Yes.
the husband is not there, or she's overarching in her protective measures, and the boy, if he is in that situation, he will never fully grow up.
Mm-mm. He'll
Or
be the
at least
narcissist.
it will be
Yeah.
very hard for him. And
Yeah.
and that means that he does not really will live a full life with responsibility, that
No.
he learns to confront problems head on, and not next week,
Yeah.
next week.
Yeah, that's interesting that he said that, because what he was probably picking up on was the over enmeshed mother with the golden child son, which I think, this goes back to, I don't know if it's innate psychologically. I mean, mothers and children have a bond anyway, but if a woman doesn't have an appropriate relationship with herself, her own father, or her husband, who is a father, right, when she has a child, then though her emotional needs, she's going to project on the child because the father is unavailable, or the husband. And so that will create that problem. So it's interesting how Jung saw it as a conspiracy, but it's actually the result of unmet needs because of an absence of maybe true fathering, or a woman projecting overprotection because she doesn't feel safe. Why is she not feeling safe? Is it because she's really not being protected by the male who didn't grow up to be a protector? It's her husband. So I could see how all these roles, if they are not mature, will result in all kinds of, problems. So that's fascinating, though. I mean,
I think that this conspiracy takes place on a subconscious level.
yeah.
I don't think that anybody is sitting there and plotting that
No.
with mother and son. No, no.
No.
I think that is a subconscious thing.
Kind of goes back to, how Jung saw the archetypes of the unconscious in everyone, as well as the collective unconscious, and how that maybe that corresponds to early traumas and unresolved, wounds and conflicts that are still not fully resolved or come to our awareness. And so we act those out unconsciously, and we act them out unless we heal our wounds. And so, in cultures where, therapy wasn't done, I mean, they would go to religion, right? Or they would go to medicine, or maybe different things to try to heal their wounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And rites of passage, you already talked about that. And it is very interesting that we have tribes that are still doing the same rites of passage that they did centuries ago. And that means that those people obviously understood that something colossal has to happen to take the child out of the man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I believe that's true. Like almost like an initiation.
Yeah.
Well, that's why they would go hunting
Mm.
with the older men and boys, and and if they didn't do that, if they didn't go through that passage, they never were able to build the confidence as a man. And and
Yeah, they
fathers
go
have,
even, sorry,
yeah.
they go even further. They let's say they train you, first of all, yes, okay. But then you have to survive, let's say, for 2 months in the wilderness all by yourself. That is your rites of passage.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay. Here in the Western world, you couldn't do that. You would go to jail right away.
Oh yeah, that's abuse.
Um,
Like,
so I'm thinking, what could we do to have a substitute for that?
I still think there has to be parents or grandparents who are present and who know and have been through these things so that they can appropriately train and mentor the children. And that takes a lot of strength because someone else has done it before them. And I just think that the kids, they don't have that today. Their parents are strapped, they're kids themselves, and we don't have that in our culture. It's almost like it's been taken out of the white culture or Caucasians. Seems to be in the Native Americans, for example, or the indigenous peoples or the older generations where, maybe even in the early goddess cultures, for all we know, they might have known about these important interpersonal passages that had to take place to create maturity and good family relating and good, communal tribal living, because we needed each other. So I just think a lot of people don't have no idea what that is,
Mm, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, taking the child out of the man.
Yeah.
So the entire time when this nonsense started last year, I asked myself time and again, where are the men? Why are so few standing up and saying, you know what, you're not going to violate my family. You are not going to dictate if I am allowed to work or not. Yeah.
Yes.
But overall, yes, of course, there are people who are standing up and speaking out. But overall, I would have to say it was a little bit disappointing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would have to say, I mean, I felt this in my own life, even before, the whole COVID thing or the crisis, that, because of where I was at in my own life and what I attracted in my life, which was, of course, a narcissist. Why else would I know so much about it? Because I went through it. But it was as if, as a woman, as a mother, that I basically had to be a single parent. I had to be, the mom and the dad, the woman and the man, to make up for the lack of the male who was emotionally unavailable and a covert narcissist. And it kind of made me, in some ways, it made me overprotective of my child. But at the same time, it was like it forced me into a role that had to double up to make up for the absence of, the appropriate presence of husband and quote father. And I see that also happening today, where there's almost a tendency for some men, I don't want to say all, but to be, I'm going to call it the Aspergerish kind of emotionally unavailable male who, because they didn't grow up or whatever, they became unavailable and absent to be actually the true protector and defender. For example, even in my own life, and I don't need to use this always as an example, but in times where, let's say, I was in situations where I was afraid for my life, or I was unsafe because of things that I was involved in UFO research, for example, or having to do so much on my own, even at 7 months pregnant, when I shouldn't be carrying heavy things or taking out heavy garbage, having to ask over and over and over again for my husband to take out the garbage, because at 7 months pregnant, when, I was having difficulty walking, having to ask him over and over and over again, can you please take out the garbage? It's fucking too heavy for me. And then being in situations where I was so normalized to having to do it all because I couldn't depend on him to be present for me in some real basic ways, like to be afraid for my life. So I had to basically put on the superwoman role because of the lack of my male husband, protector, and father of my child. And it wasn't like, he was a psychopath or anything. It was just that it's throwing many women into a role of having to do it all. Like the single woman or the single Black woman who's raising children on her own it happens in society all the time. Like the single woman raising the children on her own, and it forces her to be the man and the woman and the protector. And it's sometimes it can take us away from being able to be just a woman. Gee, wouldn't it be nice if you could just be a woman? Like, I felt like I have to be a man and a woman and a husband and a wife and the eternal widow to make up for the lack of something that happened to the male protector, defender, father figure, which really is an assault on, maybe there is an assault on the divine masculine that's absent, that never was able to grow up and be fully present in our culture, in our society, in our world. And I don't know if you noticed that, but even in my own observation, not only post-COVID with the need to get together with our tribe and our local areas, since we are restricted to travel sometimes. So many of us have had to actually go back to talking with our neighbors and getting to know people in our local community instead of what we would normally do online or running from one city to the next. And what I noticed is that, okay, so when we got together with these tribes with, common themes of interest, whether it was patriots, whether it was health, whether it was spirituality, 80% would be women, especially older women, divorced women, single women, or widows. Okay. So there's something here that's socially, there's an absence. I see this as an absence of males, like on the forefront of social change that needs to happen in a way where we really need to be together for each other in communities, in tribes, and families. And there's like this absence that is shocking. And I don't know if you see this where you are, but maybe it's just where I live, where there's actually more women to men ratio, but it's like, why?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, and yes, I do see it. I had an encounter with a grown-up man, and he felt threatened because I said something about face masks that he didn't like, and then he advised me to leave the shop. And but I was already in the process of paying. He was standing behind me, and then I just said to him, well, I guess you can take a deep breath now, and I will go relax. And I thought, what a pity excuse for a man. Yeah, that he felt threatened, uncomfortable because I'm shopping there.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of things that we didn't think we would even see, which I'm kind of shocked. well, I see it as a type of control and manipulation happening on another level. That might be spiritual and that might be technological as well. That may have to do with this engineered operation over time as part of a large long-term agenda, which is hijacking people's consciousness so that, if they're not connected to, let's say, a mature, individuated person, a Jungian term here, or spiritually connected, like I mentioned before, they will be more easily swayed to take on a role of defense to a belief system that they're holding on to as a part of their identity and part of their strength, which is really not who they are. And so this is what this crisis has turned it into, where people are being divided into like basically what they believe about the virus or the jab or the this or the that. And then it's like being forced into these boxes of belief systems, which is actually occurring on another level of being, which is a mental belief system narrative, which hijacks you out of the feeling, love, being mode, which should be where we're operating in order to be more at peace and harmony with one another and our environment. So it is an agenda, but it's happening in ways where we're actually not aware of it's happening because it's happened over time in a slow, mind-controlled way. I mean, I don't think I would have known unless I observed this over time as a researcher to see the detrimental effects on how it's like the technological aspect and mental functioning has been used to hijack people out of their feeling, being, interpersonal relating modes, which is easier to do with someone who I think is either spiritually not quite connected, emotionally immature, or Aspergerish, or more left brain. So the hijack will happen more easily on that level, you ask me. And then it turns people into just carrying out the mind controlled narrative and then being very defensive or even offensive and aggressive in ways that it's almost shocking. And I've seen this actually in the younger generations where you would think as maybe the younger 30-something-year-olds, for example, that they would know because they grew up in the internet where you could actually do research and find out things, right?
But they don't.
But they're following like the agenda and they're like mind controlled. I'm like, I can't believe they believe this shit. Like, what's wrong? How come they didn't get it? Like, and I'm stunned, I don't know.
Yeah. And what I also sometimes see that, you have to allow for failure, even if it's big failure. It has to happen, and then you clean up your own mess and you learn your lesson. You know what I mean? It makes no sense to avoid that. And yes, of course, you do not let a little child touch the hot stove or whatever. Yeah, okay. But other than that, while the child is getting older and older, failure has to happen. And then you figure a way out yourself how to clean it up and why and figure out why did I do that, what was I thinking, and so on and so forth. So would you say that is another aspect that is important, that we really have big failures?
Yeah, but failure is actually a natural part of growing up, and I think maybe it's our perception of failure is something that's causing a problem with people afraid to take those risks and afraid to grow up and afraid to, go into the woods for 2 months or whatever it would be a rite of passage that would be appropriate for where we're at. They become afraid of being shamed or afraid of being left homeless and abandoned. There's a deep fear of shame and humiliation, especially I've seen that with kids who had, let's say, the narcissistic parent who shamed them and humiliated them and made them worthless for like the smallest infraction, so that they became frozen and afraid to take the risks and know that, hey, sometimes we fail and we learn from these things and we move on, and we don't personalize the shame and the failure as us being like horrible people, that we take it as a learning experience to learn from and to be encouraged to keep moving forward, and that, okay, and reflect upon that. Let's talk about that. If we could make it so that it's natural to fail sometimes, and we learn from those things and we move on. But if someone tries to shame and humiliate and punish someone unjustly, then that makes them afraid to be stronger and to take risks.
Yeah.
Or the overprotective mom could do that. And I could have been a better parent myself when I look back. I could have been, maybe not so overprotective and afraid, and I think maybe it is a maternal instinct to want to protect and almost overprotect. But then that's where I think the child needs to learn, from their dad, like a son needs to learn from their dad how to be a man.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard for a woman to show a boy how to be a man if, you're a woman, and we can as single parents, but it's not easy.
Yeah. So I found another interesting quote that is by Gilbert Hurt, and he said, "Femininity unfolds naturally, whereas masculinity must be achieved." Would you agree?
Wow. Well, that's interesting. I mean, if I looked at this from a biological perspective, for example, embryonically and genetically, we are females until we develop into males. So that our innate original form in the human body, at least, is female. So it's natural for females to be female because that's our original state, actually, which is a kind of a hard thing to grasp for men. But even from a Taoist perspective, I believe that's true, that yin, as female, is the origin of all life. And all life comes from yin and then expresses into yang. So for example, the yin comes first from the original creation of the non-dual. The yin creates the foundation for the yang. So if male or more yang, it always comes from the foundation of yin first, pre-existent. So man must develop off the offshoot of yin. So it seems to be that the male must develop and differentiate from the female, and it is like an extra step. And it's interesting. I mean, I hadn't heard that quote before, but maybe that is true.
Yeah, I would say so, because I don't know any tribe that has rites of passages for women.
I don't know either, but I think it's
just
women, like girls need a mom. I think that it's good if girls have a mom to show them how to grow up to be a woman. And that if a woman, let's say a girl grows up without a mom, that she could actually develop, let's say the counterpart or the mirror image of, let's say the man boy, what we talked about, where it would be the princess or the one who never really had the mom, and then maybe the father was her only source of direction. And then if the father had not enough of the wife present, he might be over enmeshing on an emotional level with the daughter, ogling or overprotecting to make her an entitled princess. So that can happen with, the man who has the absent wife, or emotionally is being neglected by the wife or doesn't have one, and then using the daughter to get his emotional needs met, or just ends up being the only parent. So you can get the reverse psychology of that too.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that quote. How I think that if we're left to our own naturalness, we will be what we are and not feel like with gender confusion, I think.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so much there with that. Like, oh my God. Yeah.
So with the princess programming, we also see a focus on beauty and outward appearance. And that, of course, can become very, very stressful because rather sooner than later, you are getting older. And if that is your top priority, it will
Food,
become very frustrating.
God. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole thing there, and
Mm.
I think goes back to, what they call the fallen angels, and when they corrupted, let's say, an original pure tribal human, whatever they were, because there was the thing about introducing the charms and beauty and makeup to the women, and then like the sorcery and then the war and everything. But in reality, like there's really no need, there should be no need to have to make ourselves more beautiful with makeup and with dress and to be eternally youthful as a value. For example, a lot of women, even if you were raised even in the 70s and 80s, it seems like with some of the entertainment industry emphasis on our value as women is our sexuality and our beauty. And that, if we want to get a man and get ahead in life, our value has to be that our desirability as a beautiful woman or overly sexual or servicing a male. Or it's almost like the sacred, well, I'm not going to call it sacred. I'm going to call it the priestess whore archetype, where this was actually instituted back in history, I think, as a way to service the false male gods. And so that the women's value was only being like this whore, kind of youthful whore virgin thing, right? And so then as we got older, we lost our value. And actually we see this today. And I saw this in the dating scene, like post-divorce in my late 40s, for example, or in 50s, on the online dating scene, and also in the employment, trying to get a job, regardless of like near PhD level education, not being able to get a job, not being able to find someone equal to my own age. All I found was like male much older than me or predators, and then jobs that were like slave jobs. Because as an older woman, I suddenly became worthless as a woman. And this was a shocking thing that I discovered post-divorce that I didn't really realize before. And not only that, but how other women, sometimes my age or younger, if they knew you were divorced, they looked at you with these like jealous eyes that you're going to steal their husband. And then they would have this like catty, jealous, like ridiculous behavior, which reinforced the worthlessness of older women or divorced women or widows. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but there is a thing about how we are devalued with age. Women are definitely devalued with age, whereas men could maintain their value as an older man,
Yeah. Would you say that the man-child and the princess are a good couple, that they are attracted
I'm
to
sure they
each
fight
other?
like cats and dogs, but they would probably go together in terms of the emotional stunted growth of never really being able to grow up into what we should be. Eternally, we want to be eternally youthful and sexually sexy, but it's immaturity, really. It's I think we learn that when we become parents, and sometimes being a parent is a great blessing in terms of personal maturity and growth, like learning how to finally put someone else first that you truly love and care for, that you would sacrifice your life for. And it takes you out of a kind of different way of being. And I feel that parents can have that extra added life lesson of learning how to get out of selfishness, to actually learn how to love someone more than our own selves, and that our children. And it's a good thing as long as it's not done in an unhealthy way. But being a parent is it is a type of rite of passage when you think about it.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because your life changes completely
Yeah.
from one day to another.
Yeah. And I used to think, like, before I had my child, I'd be like judgmental of parents, thinking, oh, they're a bad parent, that kid's acting out all over the place. And then when I became a parent, I realized, oh, you can't always control your child to be the perfect kid, and they do funny things, and they act bad, and no matter how much you try to be a good parent. And it was a good experience for me to be a parent, even though it was hard, to be less judgmental of others and less judgmental even of my own parents, because
Yeah, and
it's not easy.
I don't want to blame the parents for this, because your parents can't teach you what they don't know.
No.
And as a society, we have done our fair share that it was possible to come to this. Yeah, this selfie generation, for instance, and now running around like zombies, checking their
Phones.
their cell phones every 30 seconds.
Yeah,
And
that's
holding it in their hands, taking it back into the bedroom. Can you imagine you did that with a landline, taking the landline with you into
oh,
your bed and checking it and bonding with it? That is how insane this is.
yeah, it's like the substitute for real relating turns into a technology that turns people into robots and takes away their natural relating skills and the emotional intelligence. And I still think it's a breeding out of the love program that, perhaps there are, extraterrestrial cultures or cultures of the ancient past that knew that there are dangers of over technology that, tends to take away from interpersonal relating and love and connection on more natural levels, because that's what's happening in society. I clearly see it now, where, I mean, there's an absence of emotional intelligence and the naturalness of connecting socially and interpersonally in a way where, it's causing quite a deficit. I mean, I see it in like what I call it, the Aspie technological geeks, that it's like an archetype now in society, like the techno geek who's like Aspie, who's like kind of like a man boy, kind of like you can't have a relationship with him. It's like an archetype, and I'm sure it happens with women too. It's just there's something missing, that it's getting distorted. I mean, like, look at Bill Gates, for crying out loud. I mean, when you look at that, it's like that's the archetype of, I don't even know what. I don't even know if I want to go.
We just need to get that.
Yeah, did you get that?
But by mentioning him, I also read one article where it was about, we have put youth and youthful look and whatever, we have put that on a pedestal. These days you have to at least look young, you have to be trimmed and fit and slim.
I mean, hence the eternal
bleached and what have you.
So the eternal single female. I mean, I don't know why I see this, but it seems to be more common psychologically for older divorced women to remain single, or widows to remain single, or to remain widows post 50 plus years old. And I don't know, or especially maybe the more awake ones, unless they're lucky enough to find someone who is a good compatible match, that they could truly be compatible, mutual with. It just seems that there's this lack. I don't know where I was going with this. It's just
it will come back. So I will briefly finish what I started, because when you mentioned Bill Gates, and so she was coming from that point of view, and then she said that the immaturity, sometimes you can see that even at the outward appearance reflects that, meaning you can talk to a so-called grown-up man, and he looks like a little child. And when I read that, I automatically thought of Mark Zuckerberg. There is, no, honestly, there is a part in him where I sometimes think he could be 16.
He does. He always looks young.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think it's the IT nerd. Well, there's probably more going on there that has to do with Illuminati, family programming, and trauma and hijacking. But there's something missing. That's quite serious, and I still think a lot of it goes back to a type of malevolent, archontic, alien consciousness which has hijacked humanity from an early time that was, I think, kept secret from a lot of the more orthodox religions and systems, which are run by the same groups that are run by these same rulers and authorities, which they call them in the Gnostic literature. And I really do think that's still the same problem, and that it might have been, the destruction of Atlantis, for example, in terms of a highly technological culture that, got hijacked by a darker side of the misuse of technology, and maybe even black magic.
Yeah, I would say.
Was infiltrated by the same ones that are doing the same kinds of things in very highly intelligent ways. To the point of even, and this was one of the questions that I brought up, but we didn't really talk about, was, for example, the distorted narratives that we're taught, even in, let's say, medicine, for example, or in human psychology, where we were talking about Freud and Carl Jung. And this is something that I'm investigating, and it's still exploratory, but if there was a distortion and a co-optation or a hijack of even Carl Jung's theories of the archetypes and how they play themselves out in the unconscious and the collective unconscious, and what people think about embracing the shadow, for example, that I think there's something more to this that may be an infection of the archontic demiurge. And this is something that has been explored and, let's say, perceived by people who have what I call the original awareness of the higher spiritual eternal nature, let's call it, where through lucid dreaming and dream yoga and exploration and integration of therapy, healing, there was a discovery of how these archetypes and dream symbols would express themselves within the dreams, not only non-lucid dreams, but also in lucid dreams. And so a lucid dream is, you're dreaming when you're dreaming, and therefore you might have a greater control of the dream, or being able to have a higher awareness of what's playing in your dreamscape. And like how our hidden conflicts and personality parts might show up as archetypal symbols or themes or personas. But somebody that I know, who I've been working with over the years, had discovered and felt that there were certain archetypal symbols and themes that would come up that seemed to be representative of a type of archontic infection that is inherent within the human psychology, and even maybe the human soul, which would be maybe the lower energetic nature, not the highest spirit, but the in-between, which I think now, when I look at it, the collective unconscious as well as the unconscious is going to be affected by a type of, what I'm going to call it, programming, a type of programming for non-lucidity. And that means if you're a lucid dreamer, we may discover this, and I discovered this in lucid dreaming, that to sustain lucidity, I know I'm dreaming, therefore I can do this or do that, or interact in the dreamscape in a way where you have more power, because you're lucid and you realize you're dreaming. But if you are not lucid, you lose your power, and you're subject to the programming of the theater of the dream, right? So it's like a theater. So the the programming or the archetypes, the natural way it will progress, it will propel you back into the theater of non-lucidity, which is directed by the, what I think is the archontic and artificial intelligence archetypes, trying to maintain a reification of your non-lucid dream or the theater of duality. Okay, I know that's complex, but this is something that has been observed, but there is a way to overcome this so that your lucidity and your connection with the highest spiritual awareness can override those programs and actually change the program, which is like, it's almost like a genetic coding inside our minds that our spirit can override the programming itself of that function that I think is taking place on an archetypal artificial intelligence level through the archetypes, which I think Jung was able to recognize and perceive, but he may not have been able to perceive correctly, in my view, the ultimate function of some of these archetypes. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
But it's still something that's exploratory, because, and this is something that has come up, and I don't want to make a big thing of it, but in psychology, there's a lot of this emphasis on the shadow work, right? The shadows of the archetypes of the Jungian, the shadow, right? And how we need to embrace our shadow and integrate our shadow, which I think in and of itself, we bring to awareness that which is unaware, and we're able to embrace, let's say, the inner child that's hurt, so that they realize that they are actually loved, and then will shift the behavior pattern, for example. But if there's, let's say, an attached entity or a demon present within the psyche or the spirit or the body of that person, and when one employs shadow work to embrace the demon, what do we end up with?
Yeah.
This is where we have to be real careful with shadow work.
Yeah. I would agree in so far as, it makes no sense denying our flaws, or the shadow itself, but fully embracing it.
Yeah, it's almost like, I remember some people telling me, and it might have been therapists who had worked with satanic ritual abuse people who have multiple personality disorder and alters that take on different identities. And this happens in MK Ultra, right? They do this on purpose. But when there's, let's say, the dark alter, who's like the rage alter, or the one that has bad behaviors or acting out behaviors, when we integrate that, we make sure that the stronger host personality, that is the one that desires to do the right thing, that is connected with ethics and morality and goodness, will be the one in charge. So you don't allow the shadow in charge. You don't allow the rage alter in charge. So you have to be the appropriate parent to, the ones acting out the shadows. So, because if you don't do that, and you let's say channel the alter that's like the bad one, then that could have a disastrous effect. So it's like we really have to take control of, the ethical part of ourselves that is driven by our highest spiritual essence, and not allow the shadows and the alters and those other ones to take control of the body,
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I also found during this time is I lost my thought. I'm very sorry.
That's okay. I mean, I know it's
Just
deep.
flew out of the window.
Yeah.
Do you have that sometimes?
I get it a lot. I think we call them senior moments, but I'm like embarrassed to say. Oh yeah, didn't get enough sleep.
I really wanted to say something good, but it just
was it a Jungian thing? Because the Jungian thing, I had wanted to actually do more investigation on the, I guess it's the question that was Carl Jung being manipulated by, let's say, Illuminati people behind the scenes when developing his theories of, the Jungian archetypes and the type of therapy with the dream symbols and everything. And if I remember correctly, and this is something that I need to reality check and to find out if it's true, but if I believe, I think Leo Zagami, who is someone who has come out to talk a lot about Illuminati bloodline experiences and secret societies and a lot of history. But I think he had said something on an interview, and I think it was with, I don't know if it was with Michael Jaco, who it was with, but it was a really good interview where he mentioned Carl Jung and how Carl Jung was being influenced in a bad way towards his theories of psychology. And I don't know what it was or what aspect it was that was, let's say, a co-optation or a hijack, which is meant to divert human progress. And I do think that that has happened in traditional psychology, where, it's run by, the American Psychological Association, or people who are the system run, just like the Medical Association, versus the alternative natural healers who are kind of getting to the root of illness or getting to the root of psychological woundings and finding like the right theories and the truth of true human nature to apply the psychological resolution and healing strategy. That I think our theories have been corrupted to drive us into maybe the wrong direction, or not a quite right direction for healing and therapy. And that you had mentioned this before, is that many people who had gone through trauma, and I think this was the discovery of the Richard Grannon work, that many of these people is like, they would go from therapist to therapist and they have complex PTSD. And it's like, it just wasn't getting better. And it was like, why is this not getting better? And I have some of my own ideas as, how can we really do the true therapy and get to the root of, getting well. And I think there's a lot of discoveries that have been made in later years that have to do with the neuroplasticity, polyvagal theory, the getting the nervous system re-regulated, and the brain chemistry, and all those aspects that have to do with the, I think they call it, Peter Levine mentions this in the somatic experiencing connection with deep trauma in the body and in the nervous system, that is directing compulsive behaviors that are actually neurochemically based on the nervous system being completely dysregulated, as well as the immune system. So we have to go really deep levels on things that we really didn't quite understand until these pioneers came forth because of their own traumas, and they finally figured something out that worked, and then they're finally applying this. But I just still think that it's not just biochemistry or nervous system, that there is something spiritual at work here that is not clearly understood or maybe applied.
Yeah, I would agree. I certainly think that taking care of your biochemistry, let's say you change your diet, you eat better foods, and because that has also to do with how you feel and how you function in the world. It's a massive undertaking. It's not something that you can do on the side.
No,
And
it years and money. I mean, it's basically alternative therapies that insurance wouldn't cover, right? For American medical. And so it's really the pioneers who have, been through decades of self-exploration and healing and discovery, and, gone the extra mile. And it is a hero journey. It really is. It's something that, the narratives that we were told weren't exactly true. And so I think we need to always be open to discovery through hard work and, being willing to go the extra mile to discover and to heal and to integrate and to learn something new that maybe we didn't know before, And it means being humble, like knowing that you don't know all the answers, really.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And we don't have to kiss the frog to find the prince.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's this whole frog thing. It's interesting. There's this frog that has the psilocybin or some kind of psychedelic thing where you actually lick the frog, and it makes me wonder, like, if that came from that, like the kiss the frog thing. Well, maybe it was like kissing and licking this like psilocybin frog, and then you like discovered all this stuff and integrated some like experience to discover something. But yeah, you don't have to kiss the frog. And it's almost like, yeah, there's this programming for women that like the beast and the, what do they call it? The Princess and the Beast. There's a whole
Beauty
Disney
and the Beast.
Yeah, the Beauty and the Beast. Like, well, we just have to accept them as they are. They can't help it. They're going to be angry and rageful and, go out and drink and carouse and, abuse their kids and be pedophiles. But, they can't help it. I mean, I've seen enablers talk like that, where they're literally like, well, you have to kiss the frog to get your king or your prince. I'm like, no, I don't think so. Let's stop making excuses.
I don't want to.
For like friggin' whatever they are. Like, I'm not going to make excuses, and I'm not going to have to suffer and go through misery after misery after misery to find one good man, because there's something wrong with that narrative. Definitely.
Yeah. And again, you have the same thing. If you don't kiss the frog, then yeah, you have no partner. You are not complete, because
you'll be a
nobody is complete.
Oh, like the thing in the old days was like, oh, you're a spinster. Like, oh, you're a woman who never got married. There must be something wrong with you. Oh. Like in reality, like a lot of women who become divorced, or maybe they never married because for one reason or another, but sometimes they made the right reason to divorce the man who was abusive and wrong and a very bad role model for the child. And they made the right decision, but they're being shamed, like the divorcee is like a bad thing, like, oh, the spinster. So, our society has been raised to believe that there's something wrong with a single older woman, or a divorced woman, or one who never married, or who decided to stay single for whatever reasons. Yeah. But we should never compromise our integrity or our ethics or our well-being or the well-being of our children for the sake of a partner, because we're enabling, well, whatever that is, right? The Bill Gates or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or the Zuckerberg or the whatever.
Yeah.
And I hate to use that as an example to badmouth. I mean, I don't mean to do that. It's just that
I think there is no damage that you can do, really. That my audience, I'm pretty sure you can't do any damage there.
Well, there's our public figures who've actually become archetypes, actually in the collective unconscious, and it's true. So it's not like I'm slandering. It's just that they have actually become archetypes. That there are certain archetypes that we should no longer enable them coming into power. What allowed this to come into power, because we've enabled it, and that we need to be strong women and men to not enable these infectors and hijackers and corruptors to ruin any more generations.
Yeah, but these troubled, distorted, and weak characters, they run the world right now.
It seems like that's been the history for a very, very long time, and I'm looking forward to a change, and I don't know where we need to step in to make the correction, or if it has to be a divine intervention. I sometimes wonder. But it seems to me that, a lot of the hero journey for women even is that, it's almost like the archetype of we have to become the husband and the wife, the man and the woman, and the eternal widow to make the correction until the true husband and the true father emerges in society. I mean, that was my experience, although it may not be true for others. It's just that sometimes the hero journey means we become solitary for a long time.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. That's what the ancient Gnostics said, even, that it was the solitary who ended up becoming free from the archontic rulers, that there was a type of journey. And not to say that I would promote, celibacy or whatever, but there's something to a journey that is taken through solitude and being solitary for a time, at least. And who knows?
Yeah, I did that deliberately, that I, at a certain stage, withdrew from the world, and I have no problems with being alone. Yeah, it doesn't bother me. I do not feel incomplete. I'm not depressed. That there is no guy running around here.
Yeah.
And
Well, I mean,
sometimes
yeah.
I even prefer it that way.
Well, I enjoy my solitude and nature. And
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean, I just don't want to put up with having to enable an immature partner that, and not to say that that's what would happen. It's just that, after a certain period of time, it's just like, I am no longer going to enable that, because that's actually, to me, that is committing a crime. To enable the perpetuation of these behaviors in partners is like committing a crime, or it's betraying your true highest calling.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a betrayal of your highest calling to enable that behavior in a relationship, or to have to put up with that. I mean, because they no longer become an equal, they become a child, or you caretake, which is not a true relationship. It's something else,
Yeah. You know what that reminds me of? A couple of years back, I was in Mombasa and we were at a nightclub. And when it was really, really crowded, there was a guy running around with a t-shirt, and on it, there was printed, "They are all sluts except mama."
That's funny. Oh God. I'm sure there's all kinds of things out there. I mean, there's a lot of women who have issues too, and I won't want to make this a bad mouthing a man thing, because I've seen a lot of immature women and younger women that actually shock me when I hear from male clients and other people, where I hear about behaviors that some of these young women have done to men. I'm like, oh my goodness, are you kidding me? And so the culture has really directed towards, I think, behaviors that are out of integrity. They're definitely out of integrity and out of an ethical guidance. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Do you think we will make it? We will get out of this mess with, let's say, collective efforts?
Well, I think there will be a necessity of doing that, but it's like there is a war. It's as if there is a war, and then we have to recognize how war operates, the casualties of war, and when to act and when to step away when you're in a war. So, it takes someone who's guided by their highest intuition as to what to do in any moment. And I don't think there's hard and fast rules for everything, but ethics has to be on top of it, on top of your, GPS system. But it's also that there's no hard and fast rules for how to behave in a certain situation, because sometimes you don't know how to act. And this is something that, I'm going to take a biblical, I won't say the scripture, but it's as if we are directed by our highest essence, let's say the Holy Spirit, that you're in a situation where sometimes we're overcome by extreme triggering or a freeze response, like in war, okay, or persecution, and we don't know what to do. And that in our normal human state, we might want to fight back or think that it's the right thing to stand up and fight back. And sometimes you wish you could have done something differently, but you were like froze, right? And that to call upon the Holy Spirit, so that in that moment, the Holy Spirit comes through you to say or do or not do whatever is inappropriate in that moment that may be different from what would be your normal personality mode of the normal human behavior for a certain situation. And this is where we really have to call upon our highest calling to work through us. That could be spontaneous and not necessarily predictable in a particular situation. And I think we're nearing a time where we're going to be coming into maybe some unpredictable and dangerous situations, possibly. I mean, we are in a war. Okay, let's face it. It's so we would always have to connect with our highest calling and that intuitive guidance of that, and then act according to that spontaneous direction of the highest wisdom that we can perceive. Because I wish there was hard and fast rules, but as I go through life, I realize that maybe what I had thought previously as a course of action may not be what happens in reality, or in a moment of when you're in a freeze response or in a situation of war or persecution. Sometimes you don't know. So that's my answer, really. Let's call upon our highest essence to work through us in such a way that is a spontaneous action of highest wisdom that will work through us in that moment.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah, very good idea. And excellent final last words.
Yeah. I wish it were easier, but really,
no, it is not easy. It's because troubled people are guiding other troubled people. And
yeah, blind leading the blind. Yeah, let me tell you. Yeah, yeah. But I enjoyed our conversation, and thank you for letting me speak freely.
Yeah,
And,
sure.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I do not have to invite you.
That's true. Yeah.
So, guys, that was it. Night flight for today with the wonderful.
Well, we could just put in a plug for my website, which you can put on the YouTube. That's just evelorgen.com.
Mm-hmm.
And my two books, the Love Bite and the Dark Side of Cupid. You can find them on alibris.com for hard copies, or probably ebook through Amazon still, or Barnes and Noble. So those are still available, and through my website or through me.
And all of that will be linked below.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, so.
Alrighty.
Yeah, what I wanted to say goodbye. Yeah. Okay. That was it. Night flight for today. Until next time. Bye bye.
Okay, well.